In our new series, India After Corona, TNIE's editor G.S. Vasu gets talking to Telangana's IT and Municipal Administration Minister Rama about what he believes the economy really needs to get out of the rut that it currently is in. KTR, who has been on the front lines of Telangana's fight against COVID, has been visiting quarantine centers, containment units, has been supervising a lot of work around the city and the state, and has been in the news because of his strong stance against in what many would believe is an impossible situation. This is what he had to say.
Thank you, Mr. KTR, for taking time off to speak to the New Indian Express. So this conversation, as I indicated to you, will be limited to the economic fallout of the virus. Since post-GST, states are more dependent on center for release of funds. Do you think Delhi did enough for states to handle the financial aspect of arose out of the crisis?
Vasu, as much as I have to say on this topic, a strong opinion as I do have on this topic, I'd like to defer it, I'd like to reserve it, and not say it openly right now. Yes, there is a lot of scope for improvement without a question. Lot more that can be done without a question. And, we as a state, we talked about quantitative easing. As a state, our Honorable Chief Minister, video conference held with all the chief ministers across the country directly by the Prime Minister, asked for helicopter money, has asked for RBI to take a bold approach.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we haven't heard back yet, but I do believe that there is still time for us to work together. I do believe that there is still time for us, both center and states, not to indulge in politics at this time, but also, to, like I said, in the spirit of the country, in the spirit of our people, to work together, to not, get into a political battle at this point. So, like I said, I have some strong opinions on the subject, but I do believe that there is still hope. I do believe that there is still scope to work together with center, and I do believe that, they still have the opportunity to come forward and help all of us as a country. Because the real action when it comes to dealing with migrant workers, when it comes to beefing up our medical infrastructure, when it comes to testing, all of this is really in the domain of the state and not in the center. So therefore, center at best can be advisory, it can give guidelines, it can direct us, it can help us expedite bringing in testing kits, medical infrastructure, give customs duty relief, etc., etc. Our health minister has asked Government of India to give customs duty relief for importing the MRI machines, CT scanners, and all the other machines that are currently, required in virology testing. So therefore, Government of India needs to look at the bigger picture, needs to do more. For instance, we also as a state have raised the demand to link up Narega with agriculture. This is the harvesting time.
Correct.
60 to 65% of Indian economy is still dependent on agriculture. It is one of the largest employment generators in the country. Our request to link up Narega to agriculture has so far not been heeded to. So this is the need of the hour. When a situation where the farmers are not getting enough workers, enough labor to harvest their crops, and there aren't enough harvesters, so to speak. So the need of the hour is for the Government of India to take a pragmatic look at every rupee they spend and how judiciously it can be spent in line with the current situation. So Government of India need not just worry about 7% of GDP spend or 5% of GDP spend. They should focus on these issues, these nuanced issues which states have been rising, and they should address these to begin with.
The RBI did take some steps. Do you think they're not sufficient enough, including easing the restrictions on states' borrowing limits?
I think they should do more. In fact, the current situation really needs for both RBI and the Ministry of Finance and Government of India at large to do more. And this is not just the voice of the states, this is the voice of all entrepreneurs across the country and all business organizations across the country. See, on the one hand, we are advising business organizations to not lay off people, and pay them full salaries, pay them full wages, etc., etc. On the other hand, we can't, at the same time, burden them with pressure of EMIs, of workflow, of cash flow. So therefore, a balanced, nuanced approach, taking into account all the advices that have been passed on from the states and also various business organizations across the country have to be taken into account. And the other thing I also wanted to quickly point out, this is the time when Government of India also needs to take a relook at its whole policy on medical devices. Currently, we import nearly 75% of med devices. Now, we were dependent heavily on APIs from China. So, all of these things, in a changed current situation, need to be relooked at. BIPP, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Commerce, all of them need to sit together and make those fundamental changes that will make India a much sought after destination for business moving forward from this crisis, because every crisis also presents, every adversity also presents an opportunity.
Correct.
Today the world is moving away from China and looking to move away from China, especially from a dependence perspective. To be over-reliant on China, to be over-dependent on China, now the world has realized that it's not a smart thing. So what is the next logical destination in terms of, the demographic value, in terms of being a democracy, in terms of the market size? That would be India, without a question. But is India now, as a country, doing enough to attract these businesses in the post-COVID situation? I believe we have to do more. I believe we have to we have to bring in a lot of reforms. We have to really attract all these mighty businesses that are going to come our way, because while there is talk of a lot of unemployment problem emanating out of this crisis, there is always a silver lining around the dark cloud. And India can definitely seize this opportunity and create more opportunities in the sunrise sector, the biotech, the life sciences, pharmaceuticals, bulk drugs, med devices. So all of these opportunities, this is the time Government of India needs to work with states which are keen in engaging, for business. So this is the time to think about further employment creation. This is also the time for Government of India to think of, doing more in the digital sense. For instance, this crisis has also showed us, that we could beef up our networks. We could beef up our capacities with respect to our telcos. So all of these opportunities have to be summed up, have to be, thought out cogently. And new policy changes have to be made, to tune ourselves to the new order of the new way of the life post-COVID.
What are the basic steps you think we need to take if we indeed have to attract these companies, industries from moving out of China to destinations like India?
Okay, there are 3 or 4 major employment generators from the perspective of manufacturing. For instance, electronics manufacturing, has had a fantastic run in China, but now all those companies are looking to move to different locations and primarily to India. It is one of the sectors which can provide great deal of employment, not just to high-tech engineers, but also to our diploma holders, also to our +2 graduates, all these kids, the polytechnic graduates, etc. So Government of India seriously needs to relook at its policy of Make in India and make those changes, especially, for the electronics manufacturers. Because many of these companies have been talking to us, have been engaging with us, but they've been drawing parallels to what is being offered in Malaysia and what is being offered in Philippines, what is being offered in Indonesia, and how India, as opposed to the policies of these 3 or 4 countries, kind of loses out. That is one huge opportunity that Government of India should take a quick look at. Secondly, textiles. A small country like Bangladesh today manufactures and produces more textiles than a country like India. A small country like Sri Lanka today produces more textiles than India. A huge opportunity again, especially in the rural economy, to start up the rural economy, to provide more employment to our women, would be apparel industry. Now, Government of India needs to immediately seize this opportunity, because that is again where China has been producing 40% of world's textiles. So therefore, it is a huge opportunity that Government of India cannot afford to miss out on. The third sector, which I pointed out already, pharmaceuticals, bulk drugs, medical devices. This again, China has been the leader. Now, huge opportunity again. Now, why do I say it's a huge opportunity? Do I see anything that is happening around the world? Of course. You may have seen the statement from Prime Minister of Japan, Abe. Japanese investors who would move away from China be incentivized. Countries like Japan, countries like South Korea are coming out with policies incentivizing their entrepreneurs to move away from China. Now, a large domestic market, and huge demographic advantage, large English-speaking population. All of this is a huge advantage for India, which positions us really well. But what we ought to do now is make policy reforms, make bold reforms, which I think will make India very, very attractive, for doing business, to create more manufacturing opportunities right here.
How quickly do you think these reforms should be in place? I mean, do you have any time frame in your mind from now?
I'm saying it should have been done yesterday. Already we should have been on top of this.
Okay.
If it is not done already, I appeal to both Mr. Piyush Goyal, I appeal to Mrs. Sitaraman, I appeal to, of course, the Government of India, all the bigwigs out there, NITI Aayog, that they should be doing this already. If it is not done already, then we are going to miss out as a country, because these are not, unfortunately, in the domain of the states.
Yes.
Broad fiscal reforms, the trade policies, the agreements that ought to be in place, they're not in the domain of a state unless Government of India does it. We can't really aspire to do more from a state perspective.
What do you think? How do you foresee the economic fallout of the virus?
With respect to the economic fallout potentially can happen from this epidemic, I think there are two things here. I've been reading up, I've been looking at a lot of reports from economists, from healthcare experts, from government officials, from various eminent citizens, that this is a toss-up between lives and livelihoods. I don't necessarily conform to that argument, because I think what we have to realize is, end of the day, human life, of course, is the most precious thing, and for any government's fundamental responsibility is to take care of its most vulnerable sections, be it in the form of the socioeconomically deprived sections, like our migrant workers, as we have come to call our workforce who travels and who works at various locations in the world and even within India. And secondly, also the population that is most susceptible to this illness. So therefore, government's fundamental responsibility has to be, and ought to be, without a question, to preserve all of its resources towards aiding these vulnerable sections to begin with. And then secondly, like I said, make substantial improvements also in your healthcare spending, in your medical infrastructure. But to do this, of course, the government will need a lot of economic might. Now, this is where, in fact, as a state, Telangana has been pleading with Government of India, has been raising over and over in the last month and a half or so, for Government of India to take a renewed approach towards our country, towards our fiscal policy, towards our monitoring policy. So therefore, we will continue to, of course, make our case. We continue to push our agenda, but at the same time, I think it's very, very important for all of us to understand, all of us to come to a consensus that at this point in time, the toss-up is not between lives or livelihoods. It has to be both. And we have to make sure that we work together, especially as a developing country, especially as a country that has got a massive population which is vulnerable. It is very, very important for governments to realize that both of them have to go hand in hand, and it's not a zero-sum game.
A lot of economists have more or less said what the Telangana Chief Minister said, and you have repeated, that we need to do quantitative easing. We should not be too worried about the fiscal deficit being pegged under 4, and that the stimulus should be at least 7 to 8% of the GDP. For example, I just heard economists saying that in the case of United States, it could possibly be as high as 15% of the GDP. So do you agree that notwithstanding our financial situation, I mean, I'm talking about the country, not the state per se, the stimulus should be at least 7 to 8% of the GDP. Do you agree with that view?
Like I said, we cannot merely aid United States or Italy, because see, in spite of what the world would like to believe, United States has a stiffer and a bigger challenge on hand than what we have today. Yes. United States is currently under the grip of a terrible epidemic, which I find very, very difficult to understand, considering the value of a human life that they normally place on each individual's life there. So I find it baffling to see people come out and protest in Arizona, other parts of the country there. So therefore, to assume and to think that whatever the United States has done can merely be copied and pasted here in our sense, in our perspective, in our situation, our circumstances is not accurate 100%. For instance, can we not leverage the money that is at the disposal of Government of India and various public sector undertakings, and also various institutions under Government of India, which can be leveraged more effectively? In fact, do you want more from Government of India in the sense of what can be done? Of course, but does it have to be linked directly to GDP? I have again absolute terms, I have a different opinion. There is a lot that can be done. For instance, in a federal republic, it's not just Government of India that needs to open up its purse strings and do more. They also have to give us the states the authority, the liberty to borrow more, to raise more, to do more. So therefore, what our Honorable Chief Minister has been saying is take a relook at your FRBM limits. Therefore, all the loans that the states have raised, discuss with RBI, out with a policy on how you can ensure that the states get into a sort of a moratorium for the next 6 to 8 months, where their cash flows are not affected. So I think in a federal structure, it's more important, to have a decentralized approach rather than a top-down approach like in the United States. Of course, it will help. Right now, I think what Government of India has come out with about 1,70,000 crores is about 1.5% of GDP. Can it be more? Should it be more? Of course, it should be more. But should it be 15%? Should it be 7-8%? I believe that it has to be somewhere in between. But India has to find its own formula.
Some measures have already been taken in regard to MSMEs, as you know. But banks are generally reluctant to lend such enterprises owing to lack of investment grade ratings, etc., etc. What, according to you, needs to be done to MSMEs in the immediate context?
Well, firstly, in fact, the understanding, and the importance that ought to be given to this sector, unfortunately, is not given. Yes, like you pointed out, there has been some relief that was offered from Government of India with respect to their ESI and EPF payments, for anybody who's got a size of 100, and also where the average payment is around 15,000. Some relief has been given. From the state perspective also, we've deferred their power bills, we've deferred their property tax payments. We've done our bit, and we are trying to see how else we can stitch up more. But what needs to be done in the immediate aftermath is we need to also get the banks to give them moratoriums. Banks have been ruthless when it comes to invoking SARFAESI for the small and micro enterprises, because even if they miss a payment of 1 month, they're invoking SARFAESI Act and they're declaring them as NPAs. RBI needs to step in, advise all the banks across the country, be it public sector or private sector banks, need to be advised very, very sternly that no bank shall declare any MSME enterprise, at least for the next 3 to 6 months, as an NPA. Because I think Government of India needs to stitch up a policy quickly to ensure that working capital requirements, moratoriums that they require, etc., are handed over to them. Because again, like I said, unfortunately, this is not in the state's domain. So it is RBI, it is Government of India that needs to ensure that the minimum viability at which they ought to be running. Post lockdown also, I think the biggest challenge is going to be instilling confidence in the workforce to return to work at full capacity. So therefore, Government of India needs to do its bit in terms of advising RBI to also and also banks to ensure that none of these enterprises are declared as NPA, at least for the next 3 to 6 months.
What's the time frame you are looking at for businesses to see the pre-COVID levels? I mean, at this point, it might be difficult to assess the exact damage to their business. But post-lockdown, what do you see a reasonable time frame? 6 months to a year?
Well, my thinking is like this, anybody for them to go back to 100% capacity pre-COVID versus post-COVID, I think it'll be a very new way of working. In my humble opinion, see, for example, if you have a factory where you had 100 workers and you were running in one shift and all 100 workers were showing up together pre-COVID, I think now you'll have to adjust to the new way of life. You'll have to work possibly in 2 or 3 shifts with either 50 or 30 employees, and you'll have to continue to do sort of in a batch processing mode, continuous 24-hour or 18-hour work, and ensure that social distancing norms are followed, all the healthcare precautions are taken. Unless a vaccine or a drug comes about which will give the workforce the confidence that they are safe completely from corona, I think it will be a challenge, to operate at pre-COVID levels. So therefore, we all have to conform, adjust, and basically, work in the newer set of conditions. And we also have to have healthcare professionals visiting the workforce frequently, the doctors, etc. For frequent medical checkups have to be conducted, and ambulances have to be kept in ready should there be a dire situation. So therefore, it will be a completely new way of life, I think, post-COVID, at least till such time as a vaccine or a drug comes about. So to assume or to think that I'll operate at 100% and I'll go back to normalcy immediately, I think would be unwise at this point.
Do you think this will, in one sense, see a nationalism in terms of the economic policies? Taking off from what you said about China, do you foresee nationalism in terms of economic policies vis-a-vis the globalization model that has been followed so far?
Honestly, in fact, if anything, this virus has shown us 2-3 things, It has humbled us as humanity. It showed us that for the first time in human history, the entire world is faced with one problem, and that is this pandemic. For the first time, all boundaries have been challenged, all boundaries in terms of nationalities, in terms of races, in terms of caste, in terms of class, in terms of creed, in terms of sex, religion, everything has been challenged, everything has been redefined. So to say that, will this lead to a new nationalistic fervor? I don't think so. In fact, if anything, they should tell us that human race, irrespective of what we would like to believe, are one, are very alike and not very unlike. So in that context, I do believe that businesses, of course, will have newer opportunities. Large markets like India, if we move fast and if we act fast, we'll have opportunities. But otherwise, I think it's been a humbling experience for humanity. I think this virus has really put a lot of perspective, a lot of sense into our thought process. It has really humbled all of us to relook at our ways of life, to relook at ourselves as a human race. So therefore, it's a very interesting time. Let me put it that way.
Wow, what we thought was a matter of routine is no longer routine.
Well, I've realized one thing, and normalcy, what we take for granted typically is absolutely underrated. It's absolutely underrated, and people are dying for normalcy to be restored, which I think is brilliant.
Thank you, Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Vasu, for this opportunity, and also to the New Indian Express. New Indian Express has been tremendous in its coverage of a whole gamut of issues, with respect to this epidemic. Thank you so much for the support that you've given us so far, and I hope it will continue in the future as well. Thank you.
For the conversation. Thanks a lot.